Imagine being beaten to a pulp by an enraged mob.
Oh, man. Just a terrifying situation.
Right. Like you are dragged violently out of a sacred temple,
Yeah.
and then you're arrested by 1,000 heavily armed Roman soldiers.
Which, I mean, is a lot of soldiers for one guy.
Exactly. I think most people, if they were even conscious at that point, they would be begging for a medic.
Oh, absolutely. Or just pleading with the guards to get them behind a fortified wall as fast as humanly possible.
Right. Just to escape the crowd trying to tear them limb from limb.
Yeah, purely survival mode.
But our subject today, he used that exact opportunity while literally chained to 2 soldiers and bleeding on a flight of stone stairs to ask for a microphone.
It is just a stunning reversal of, natural human instinct.
Totally.
Because when faced with catastrophic physical danger, our biology just screams for self-preservation.
Right. Fight or flight.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yet the historical narrative we are analyzing today centers on someone who completely subverts that biological imperative.
Yeah.
He essentially weaponizes his own arrest to secure an audience he otherwise never would have reached.
And that is the wild paradox we are exploring today on this deep dive.
I am so excited for this one.
Me too. So we are unpacking a theological analysis from our source material, the Theological Study Guide.
Right.
And it focuses on the Apostle Paul, specifically looking at the events recorded in Acts chapter 21.
Yeah, a really pivotal chapter.
It really is. The overarching thesis of the material is just fascinating. It argues that the Roman Empire, the ultimate pagan occupying authority of the first century.
Right, the big bad empire.
Exactly. That they were unwittingly leveraged by God to finance, protect, and platform the spread of a subversive message.
Which is such a mind-bending way to look at history.
It is. The mission for our deep dive today is to really understand this premise. The idea that God allows his ambassador Paul to be placed in physical chains by both Jewish and Roman authorities, not as a failure of his mission, but as the precise, highly specific mechanism required to broadcast the message of a universal savior.
Yeah, and it completely reframes the concept of a setback,
Oh, completely.
The material forces us to look at the mechanics of Paul's journey and realize that what appears to be just a chaotic derailment.
Like everything going wrong at once.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's actually a meticulously orchestrated geopolitical and theological strategy.
Wow.
Like the chains are not the end of the narrative for him. They are the platform.
I really want to focus on that word strategy, because when you look at the timeline, Paul didn't just stumble into this riot blindly.
No, not at all.
He wasn't just in the wrong place at the wrong time.
Right.
If anything, he was in the exact right place at the exact right time. And he had been repeatedly warned about what was coming.
Yeah, multiple times.
Which brings us to a really fascinating psychological tension. It's the difference between a divine warning and a human prohibition.
That is such a crucial distinction.
Yeah, and we see this climax as Paul is traveling toward Jerusalem.
The geographic progression outlined in the text, it serves almost as a psychological pressure cooker.
I like that phrasing.
Yeah, because Paul is wrapping up his third missionary journey. He's navigating the Aegean and Mediterranean seas.
Right.
Moving from familiar territories where he had established these communities, and he's heading straight toward the religious capital of Jerusalem.
And the map in the study guide really traces this out beautifully.
It does. He goes from Miletus, sails a straight course to Kos, then Rhodes, then Patara.
Just island hopping.
Exactly. Then he switches to a cargo ship, heading to Phoenicia, passes Cyprus on the port side, and finally lands at Tyre.
It's a very deliberate route. It's like a countdown clock.
That's a great analogy.
Every single port brings Paul one step closer to ground zero, which is Jerusalem.
Yeah. And when they hit Tyre and stay for 7 days, that pressure cooker starts whistling.
It really does, because the text notes that the local disciples repeatedly told Paul, quote, through the Spirit, not to set foot in Jerusalem.
Right.
Now let's pause and look at this critically for a second.
Okay.
Because if the Spirit is telling him the danger and the community is telling him to stop, isn't it arguably a bit spiritually arrogant for Paul to just, ignore the consensus and keep going?
That is precisely the tension the author of our study guide addresses.
Okay.
And it requires parsing out the theology of revelation versus the application of that revelation.
Oh, interesting. Break that down.
Well, the text makes a crucial distinction for believers.
Mm-hmm.
Paul received this not as a divine prohibition.
Like a command from God to stop.
Right, not a stop sign. He received it as a divine forewarning.
Okay.
The Spirit was revealing the data, basically saying, danger, arrest, and suffering await you in Jerusalem.
So just stating the facts of what's coming.
Exactly. And the purpose of that data was to prepare Paul spiritually and mentally for the ordeal.
Oh, I see. So the data is neutral, but the human interpretation of that data is what causes the conflict.
You nailed it. The disciples in Tyre received the exact same divine data. They foresaw the suffering coming to Paul.
Right.
But out of their very natural human love for him and, their anxiety over his safety, they attached their own human prohibition to it.
Which makes total sense. If I know my friend is going to get hurt, I'm going to tell them not to go.
Of course. They interpreted danger as coming as, you must avoid the danger.
Yeah.
But Paul accepted the data while completely rejecting their interpretation.
Wow.
For Paul, the internal conviction that his mission required him to go to Jerusalem remained the overriding directive.
Right.
He was separating the revelation of hardship from that really strong human instinct for self-preservation.
That requires just an incredible amount of clarity.
It really does.
Because it's one thing to face danger when you're alone, right?
Yeah.
But it's an entirely different psychological burden to look at people who love you, who are genuinely grieving your impending suffering.
Right. They are literally crying.
And to look them in the eye and tell them you're walking into the trap anyway.
It's agonizing.
And this dynamic, it only escalates as he moves further south. He goes to Ptolemais, then down to Caesarea.
And Caesarea is a really critical location to understand in this deep dive.
Right, because it wasn't just another port town.
No, it was the Roman capital of the province of Judea.
Okay.
This was the seat of Roman power, military presence, and political administration in the entire region.
So a very heavy atmosphere.
Very. And Paul stays there in the home of Philip the evangelist,
Right.
which is a household clearly steeped in intense religious devotion.
Mm.
The text even mentions Philip's 4 prophesying daughters.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
So it's a spiritually heightened environment from the moment he walks in.
And into this environment walks a prophet named Agabus, who comes down from Judea.
Yes, Agabus.
And he doesn't just, sit Paul down for a serious conversation over coffee.
No, not his style.
He utilizes a method that feels very jarring, I think, to a modern sensibility. He walks up, takes Paul's own belt, physically ties his own hands and feet with it.
It's a dramatic scene.
Right. And he announces that the Jews in Jerusalem will bind the owner of the belt and hand him over to the Gentiles.
It is such a striking moment.
Yeah.
And to understand it, we really have to contextualize it within the Old Testament prophetic tradition.
Okay, yeah, tell me about that.
Well, prophets like Isaiah, Jeremiah, and Ezekiel, they frequently use these elaborate, often uncomfortable object lessons.
Right, they were very visual.
Very, like Jeremiah walked around wearing a heavy wooden yoke on his neck to symbolize coming subjugation to Babylon.
Oh, wow.
And Ezekiel lay on his side in the dirt for over a year to symbolize a coming siege.
That is intense. It actually reminds me of a modern political demonstrator.
Oh, that's a good comparison.
You know, someone who chains themselves to a fence or pours fake blood on the steps of a corporate headquarters.
Yes.
The goal isn't just to make a statement, it's physical disruption. It takes a conceptual reality, like impending violence, and makes it visually and tangibly impossible to ignore or intellectualize away.
That's a perfect way to describe it. Agabus is bypassing the intellect and hitting the visceral, emotional core of everyone in that room.
And the reaction is immediate.
Instantaneous.
The text describes Paul's traveling companions and the local believers just weeping and begging him not to go.
The emotional weight there is immense.
Yeah.
In analyzing this, the study guide actually draws a direct line between this moment in Caesarea and Jesus' experience in the Garden of Gethsemane.
Wait, hold on. Let's interrogate that comparison for a second.
Sure.
Because linking Paul's local arrest to Jesus' cosmic act of redemption, I mean, that feels like it could be a massive theological stretch.
It sounds like one, initially.
Right. So how does this study guide justify linking those two events?
Well, the parallel isn't in the scale of the redemption.
Okay.
It's in the mechanics of the temptation to flee.
Yeah.
In Luke 22, Jesus is in Gethsemane, fully aware of the horrific suffering of the cross that's coming.
Right.
And the text shows him wrestling internally, praying, "Take this cup from me."
Yeah.
But then saying, "Nevertheless, let not my will, but yours be done."
Right.
Jesus faced the agonizing internal debate between the human desire to escape pain and the divine mission to endure it.
I see. So for Paul, the wrestling is externalized.
Precisely. Paul's own companions become the voices of temptation.
Wow.
They are externalizing the very human desire to choose comfort and survival.
Yeah.
They are providing him with a socially and even religiously acceptable off-ramp. They're basically saying, God wouldn't want you to suffer, stay here with us.
And Paul's response is just devastating to that argument.
Well, it really is.
He says, "What are you doing, weeping and breaking my heart? For I am ready not only to be tied up, but even to die in Jerusalem for the name of the Lord Jesus."
He completely embraces the cost.
Completely. And the reaction of his friends offers a really profound model for anyone listening to this deep dive right now.
Yeah, it's a great takeaway.
Because when they realize Paul's resolve is absolute, they stop begging. They concede. They just say, the Lord's will be done.
It is a remarkable posture of surrender.
It really is.
When faced with an impending reality that we cannot control or understand or protect our loved ones from, the ultimate expression of faith, according to the source's theological framework, is relinquishing our grip.
Wow. Relinquishing our grip.
It's moving from trying to engineer a safe outcome to surrendering to a potentially painful process.
That is so hard to do.
Incredibly hard.
But they do it. They release him to the process, they pack up, make the final trek to Jerusalem, and they stay with a man named Mnason of Cyprus.
Right.
And at first glance, when you read about the arrival, it seems like maybe everyone was overreacting.
Yeah, it seems surprisingly calm.
Right. Paul meets with James and the elders, gives a detailed report of everything happening among the Gentiles, and there is celebration.
Praising God, yeah.
But that joy is incredibly fragile.
It was a very brief honeymoon phase, let's put it that way.
Seriously.
Because the physical journey and the emotional goodbyes, they were merely the prelude to navigating a deeply entrenched sociological and theological minefield in Jerusalem.
Which brings us to the tension of two worlds colliding.
Yes.
The elders don't waste time. They immediately lay out the problem for Paul.
They get right to it.
They tell him, look, there are thousands of Jewish believers here in Jerusalem who are deeply zealous for the Mosaic law.
Right.
And they reveal that a massive systemic rumor has been circulating.
A really dangerous rumor.
The word on the street is that Paul is traveling through Gentile lands and actively instructing the Jewish diaspora to completely abandon Moses.
Yeah.
To stop circumcising their children and to just forsake all their ancestral customs.
And to fully grasp why this rumor was so explosive, we have to dig into the mechanism of how first-century Judaism functioned.
Okay, let's do it.
Specifically what the text refers to as the old wineskins.
Right, the famous analogy.
Yeah. Jesus taught that you cannot pour new wine, which is the new covenant, into old wineskins, or the skins will burst.
Yeah.
But we have to ask, why were the old wineskins so brittle?
Well, the text mentions it was due to the accumulation of centuries of non-biblical traditions.
Exactly.
But how exactly does a tradition become so rigid that it literally bursts under the weight of a new movement? Like, what does that look like practically?
It has to do with the Pharisaic tradition of building what they call a fence around the Torah.
A fence around the Torah, okay.
Right. Over centuries, religious leaders wanted to ensure that the people never even came close to breaking God's laws.
Makes sense on paper.
Sure. So if the law said, do not work on the Sabbath, the tradition built a fence by defining exactly how many steps you could take.
Oh, wow.
Or what specific items you could carry, just to ensure you never accidentally worked.
So they made rules to protect the rules.
Exactly. And over generations, these fences, these sociological mechanisms of boundary maintenance, they became indistinguishable from the actual law.
The culture conflated human tradition with divine mandate.
You hit the nail on the head.
So by the time Jesus and later Paul arrive on the scene, they aren't just challenging a theology. They are threatening an entire sociological structure that had kept the Jewish identity intact under centuries of foreign occupation.
Precisely. And this requires us to define two critical theological terms that the study guide brings up.
Okay, what are they?
Justification and sanctification.
Ah, yes. Let's unpack those because they get thrown around a lot in theological discussions.
They do.
So justification is essentially the legal standing, right?
Yes.
Like being declared innocent or righteous before God.
Exactly right.
Whereas sanctification is the ongoing progressive process of becoming holy in your daily life.
Perfect definitions.
Okay, so if I have that right, how was the Jerusalem church viewing Paul's actions through those two specific lenses?
Well, the core of Paul's theology, which he outlines heavily in his letters to the Romans and Galatians, is that justification comes exclusively through faith in Christ,
Right.
not by observing the Mosaic law.
Right.
The Jewish believers in Jerusalem, however, were really struggling to separate their cultural identity from their theological justification.
So wait, was Paul actually out there campaigning against Jewish traditions?
No, not at all.
Did he hate the customs? Because if the rumor was false, what was his actual stance on a Jewish person practicing their heritage?
Paul's stance was highly nuanced, which is why it was so easily misunderstood by the masses.
Nuance is always the first casualty in a rumor mill.
Isn't that the truth? He did not view the cultural customs of Judaism as evil or inherently wrong.
Okay.
He viewed them as completely unnecessary for justification.
I see.
He had no objection to circumcision as a cultural practice.
Yep.
I mean, earlier in Acts, he actually had his protege Timothy circumcised.
Wait, really?
Yes, he did it to remove a cultural barrier for their ministry together.
Okay, that is fascinating.
What Paul went to war against was the insidious idea that these cultural rites were required to earn God's acceptance.
He was fine with the customs as a heritage,
Yes.
but he absolutely rejected them as a prerequisite for salvation.
Precisely. Paul was no longer a Jew in his religious reliance.
Yeah.
His reliance was on Christ alone.
Right.
But he remained a racial and cultural Jew.
Yeah.
The tragedy in Jerusalem was that the zealous Jewish Christians couldn't comprehend that distinction.
It was all or nothing.
Exactly. To them, if you stopped relying on the law for your salvation, you were effectively declaring a cultural war on the Jewish people.
Which perfectly explains why the Jerusalem elders were so terrified when he arrived.
They were panicking.
They had a massive PR crisis on their hands. Thousands of their congregants essentially viewed Paul as a cultural traitor.
Right.
So they formulate a strategy to visually and financially prove Paul's solidarity with his heritage.
A very clever strategy, honestly.
Yeah. They tell him about 4 men who have taken a Nazirite vow.
Right.
They ask Paul to join them, go through the purification rites, and pay their expenses so they can shave their heads.
This was a brilliant, albeit incredibly expensive and tedious piece of cultural diplomacy.
Tedious is right. Can you explain what this vow actually entailed?
Sure. The Nazirite vow, which is detailed back in Numbers chapter 6,
Right.
it was a period of intense dedication to God. It involved abstaining from any grape products, not cutting one's hair at all,
Wow.
and strictly avoiding contact with corpses so as not to become ritually unclean.
Okay.
When the time period of the vow concluded, the individual had to offer significant sacrifices at the temple.
What kind of sacrifices?
We are talking a male lamb, a female lamb, a ram, plus grain offerings and drink offerings.
That is a lot of livestock.
It is. And then they had to shave their head and burn the hair on the altar.
That is a massive financial undertaking,
Yep.
especially paying for 4 other people to do it.
It was huge. By paying these expenses, Paul was acting as a sponsor,
Okay.
which was a recognized act of immense piety in first-century Judaism.
I see.
Furthermore, because Paul had been traveling in Gentile lands, which were considered ritually unclean by default.
Right, the pagan territories.
Exactly. He had to undergo a full 7-day purification process himself, just to be allowed to enter the proper courts of the temple to pay for these men.
Wow. And this highlights a really profound principle for you listening right now.
It really does.
Think about Paul's theological stance. He wrote the book on Christian freedom.
Literally.
He vehemently argued that the blood of bulls and goats cannot take away sin.
Right.
Yet here he is, willingly submitting himself to a rigorous, expensive 7-day temple ritual involving animal sacrifice.
Yeah.
Why? Because he understood the principle of cultural adaptability.
Yes.
He was willing to sacrifice his own personal freedom, his time, and his own money to ease the conscience of his Jewish brothers.
You go ahead, Abel.
He was demonstrating that his freedom did not require him to trample on the cultural sensitivities of others.
It is the absolute embodiment of his own teaching in 1 Corinthians.
Yeah.
You know, to the Jews I became like a Jew, to win the Jews. He prioritized the unity of the church and the effectiveness of his witness way over his own theological liberties.
It's a masterclass in putting the mission above personal preference.
Truly.
But as the source material points out, even the most flawlessly executed PR strategy can be entirely dismantled by the sheer destructive power of a single false assumption.
Oh, man.
And this is where the geopolitical and architectural realities of Jerusalem come crashing down on Paul.
Crashing is the right word.
The strategy was actually working perfectly. The 7 days of purification are nearly complete. Paul is in the temple, fulfilling every requirement.
He's checking all the boxes.
But then he is spotted by a group of Jews from the province of Asia.
Likely from Ephesus, where Paul had spent years ministering.
Right, so these aren't just local Jerusalemites who heard a rumor.
Oh.
These are people who know exactly who Paul is and have likely clashed with him in the diaspora already.
They hold a grudge.
Yeah. When they see him in the temple, they don't ask questions. They don't seek clarification from the elders.
Of course not.
They immediately start shouting, inciting the crowd, and throwing out a two-pronged accusation.
Right.
First, they revive the old rumor. This is the man who teaches everyone against our people, our law, and this sanctuary.
Yeah.
But it's the second accusation that acts as the match in the powder keg. They claim Paul brought Greeks into the temple, defiling the holy place.
And the study guide highlights a deeply flawed, yet universally recognizable mechanism of human psychology here.
Which is?
The danger of cognitive bias.
Yeah.
And drawing straight lines between completely unrelated data points.
Oh, yes. The jumping to conclusions.
Exactly. The Asian Jews had seen Paul walking in the city earlier with a man named Trophimus.
Okay.
And Trophimus was an Ephesian Gentile.
Right.
Later, they see Paul inside the temple, so their brains just completely bypass logic.
Yeah.
They skip any verification process and create a false reality.
They think Paul was with a Gentile earlier, Paul is in the temple now,
Yeah.
therefore Paul brought the Gentile into the temple.
Exactly.
It's terrifying because, we still do this today.
All the time on social media.
Right. We see two pieces of information, construct a narrative that confirms our worst fears or our biases, and we act on it as if it were absolute truth.
Yep.
But in first century Jerusalem, acting on that specific assumption wasn't just spreading gossip.
No.
It was inciting lethal violence. And to understand why, we have to look at the architecture of the temple itself, which the study guide details.
Yes.
Because this wasn't just a large building where everyone mingled freely. It was an engine of exclusion.
That is a perfect way to describe it.
Yeah.
Absolutely. The Temple Mount was this massive complex, but it was strictly zoned.
Okay, paint a picture of that for us.
So the outermost perimeter was the court of the Gentiles.
Right.
Anyone, Jew, Roman, Greek, merchant, anyone could enter this massive plaza.
It was basically public space.
Exactly. But separated the court of the Gentiles from the inner sanctuaries was a low stone balustrade.
A wall.
Yeah, called the soreg.
It's like the velvet ropes at an ultra-exclusive club, or the security checkpoints at a high-level government facility.
Right.
The further in you go, the more restricted the access.
Exactly. And the soreg wasn't just a suggestion. It wasn't a polite sign. Archaeologists have actually discovered the stone warning blocks that were placed along this barrier.
Really? That's amazing.
Yeah, they were written in Greek and Latin, so literally no one could claim ignorance.
Wow.
And they essentially read, "No foreigner is to enter within the balustrade and enclosure around the temple area.
Okay.
Whoever is caught will have himself to blame for his ensuing death."
His ensuing death. Wow. So crossing that line wasn't just a cultural faux pas. It was a literal capital offense.
Yes.
And what's wild to me is that the Romans, who usually reserved the right of capital punishment exclusively for themselves.
Right, which is why the Jewish leaders had to take Jesus to Pilate to be crucified.
Exactly. But the Romans made a specific exception just for the temple.
They did.
They allowed the Jewish temple guards to execute anyone, even a Roman citizen, who trespassed past the soreg into the women's court, the court of Israel, or the court of priests.
Because the Romans understood that the temple was the absolute core of Jewish national identity.
Right.
Defiling it was the one thing guaranteed to start an uncontrollable province-wide rebellion.
Which they wanted to avoid at all costs.
Exactly. So when the Asian Jews scream that Paul brought a Gentile past that barrier, it ceases to be a theological dispute about justification.
Yeah, theology's out the window.
Completely. In the eyes of the crowd, Paul has just committed the ultimate act of desecration.
He has jeopardized the sanctity of their most holy site.
Yes. And by extension, their fragile peace with God.
The visceral reaction of the crowd is immediate. The text says the whole city was stirred up.
People just came running from every direction.
They seize Paul, physically drag him out of the inner temple courts, and the text includes this highly symbolic, almost cinematic detail.
I love this detail.
It says, immediately the doors were shut.
Yeah. Those were the massive doors separating the inner courts from the court of the Gentiles.
Right.
The shutting of those doors is a profound visual representation of official rejection.
Oh, wow.
The religious establishment is physically locking him out. He is expelled from the heart of Judaism.
That gives me chills. And once he is dragged into the outer court of the Gentiles, the mob mentality takes complete control.
Total chaos.
They stop asking questions and simply start beating him, intending to kill him right there on the pavement.
And this is where the geopolitical chessboard shifts entirely.
Yeah, it really does.
And we are introduced to a new power player, Claudius Lysias.
To understand how Lysias gets involved so fast, we have to look at where he is physically located.
Right.
He's the Roman commander of the fortress of Antonia.
And the fortress of Antonia was just a masterstroke of Roman military intimidation.
Tell me about it.
It was a massive, heavily fortified garrison built directly onto the northwest corner of the Temple Mount.
Okay.
It had these tall towers that looked down directly into the temple courts.
Oh, so they could see everything.
Everything. It was intentionally designed this way because the Romans knew that the temple, especially during major festivals, was the most likely flashpoint for an insurrection.
It was an ancient architectural riot control system.
Precisely.
You have an occupying empire literally looming over the sacred space of the people they are subjugating.
Yeah. And Claudius Lysias is the tribune in charge. He commands a cohort, which is roughly 1,000 soldiers.
1,000 soldiers?
Yes. And a tribune's primary job in Jerusalem wasn't to, understand Jewish theology.
Right, he didn't care about the wineskins.
Not at all. His job was to maintain the Pax Romana, the Roman peace, at all costs.
Yeah.
If a riot broke out and he failed to contain it, it could cost him his career or literally his life.
So when a report reaches him that all Jerusalem is in confusion?
He doesn't form a committee.
No. He instantly summons his centurions, who each command 100 men, and a massive detachment of heavily armed Roman soldiers pours out of the fortress.
Just sprinting down the stone stairs directly into the court of the Gentiles.
You can just imagine the sensory overload of that moment.
Oh, man.
The deafening roar of a mob committing a lynching, the dust, the blood.
Yeah.
And then suddenly the terrifying rhythmic sound of hundreds of Roman soldiers in full armor marching down the steps in formation.
The sheer projection of military force is the only thing that stops the mob from finishing Paul off.
When they see the commander and the soldiers, they stop beating him.
And Claudius Lysias arrests Paul right on the spot.
Right?
Now, look at this from Lysias' perspective for a second.
Okay.
He looks down from his tower, sees an entire city trying to tear one man apart, and naturally concludes that this man must be a high-value threat.
Like a notorious criminal or an insurgent leader.
Exactly. So he orders Paul to be bound.
Mm-hmm.
But the text is very specific. He orders him bound with 2 chains.
Oh. This is where you have to stop and rewind back to the house in Caesarea.
Yes.
Remember Agabus the prophet? He took Paul's belt, tied his own hands and feet, and said, "This is the way the Jews in Jerusalem will tie up the man whose belt this is, and will hand him over to the Gentiles."
It is incredible.
The prophecy is fulfilled with terrifying precision. The Jews didn't put the physical Roman chains on Paul, but they incited the violence that handed him directly into the custody of the Gentiles.
It is the exact realization of the divine forewarning.
Yeah.
The Romans secure him, and Claudius Lysias tries to conduct an on-the-spot interrogation.
Good luck with that.
Right. He asks the crowd, who is this man and what has he done? But he's trying to cross-examine a riot.
It's impossible.
Some are shouting one accusation, others are screaming something completely different.
Yeah.
The disturbance is so loud and chaotic that he can't ascertain a single fact. So he orders Paul to be brought up the stairs into the barracks of the fortress.
But the mob is so enraged, so desperate to bypass the Roman guards and get their hands on Paul.
They are out for blood.
Yeah, that by the time they reach the steps, the soldiers literally have to carry Paul to protect him.
Wow.
The crowd is surging against the shield, screaming, "Away with him!" The violence is just absolute.
And this brings us to what I consider the most remarkable pivot in the entire historical account.
I agree.
It's the core of the paradox we are exploring today.
Yeah.
We have to look at the sheer irony of Paul's situation as he is being carried up those steps.
Let's frame the reality of his physical condition right now. Paul is bleeding.
Yes.
He is likely concussed from the beating. He is chained to 2 soldiers. He is being carried because a mob of his own countrymen is trying to assassinate him.
Right.
By any conceivable human metric of success, his mission to Jerusalem has ended in total catastrophic failure.
If you or I were in that situation, our entire psychological bandwidth would be consumed by survival.
100%.
We would be focused on the pain, on the terror of the mob, and we would be begging the Roman commander to get us behind the heavy iron doors of the fortress as quickly as possible.
Right. We'd be like, Just lock me in a cell where they can't reach me.
Exactly. But Paul does the unthinkable.
He really does.
He doesn't ask for a medic. He doesn't ask for water. He turns to the commanding officer who has just arrested him, and he asks for the microphone.
It's wild. As he is about to be brought into the barracks, Paul speaks to Claudius Lysias, and he does it in Greek. He says, "May I say something to you?"
And the commander's reaction is just one of absolute shock. He says, "Do you know Greek?"
Because he was expecting something else entirely.
Exactly. The study guide explains that Claudius Lysias was operating under a massive pre-existing assumption.
Right.
He had completely myth-identified Paul. He assumed Paul was a notorious Egyptian rebel who had recently led 4,000 men.
4,000.
Yeah, a group known as the Assassins or the Sicarii out into the wilderness to start an insurrection against Rome.
It is almost absurd.
It really is.
Imagine getting beaten up by the religious establishment, only to be rescued by the military, who immediately assumes you are a terrorist warlord.
Talk about a bad day.
Seriously, how do you even begin to pivot from an assumption that massive?
Well, you pivot by understanding exactly how power and status operate in the system you are trapped in.
Oh, that's good.
Paul delivers an absolute masterclass in de-escalation and cultural positioning.
Yeah.
He doesn't panic. He corrects the Roman commander immediately, but he does it with immense authority.
He says it in fluent, educated Greek, too, which was the lingua franca of the Greco-Roman world.
Exactly. Paul states, "I am a Jew from Tarsus in Cilicia, a citizen of an important city. Please allow me to speak to the people."
We really need to unpack what a strategic flex that is.
Oh, it's a huge flex.
Because Tarsus wasn't just a dot on a map. It was a major academic, philosophical, and cultural hub in the Roman Empire.
Right.
It rivaled Athens and Alexandria in terms of its universally and Stoic philosophy.
Yeah.
By claiming citizenship there, in perfect Greek, Paul immediately shatters the caricature the commander had in his head.
Completely shatters it.
He elevates himself from an anonymous, rabble-rousing insurgent to an educated, cultured citizen of the empire.
Yes.
He commands the Romans' respect instantly through his linguistic and civic credentials.
It is incredibly effective. The commander is entirely disarmed by Paul's credentials, and he actually grants him permission.
Which is crazy when you think about the riot happening below them.
Right. And then Paul executes a second brilliant tactical maneuver.
Okay, what does he do?
He stands on the steps of the Roman fortress, the very stairs meant to symbolize Roman military domination over the Jewish people.
The optics are just staggering.
He motions with his hand to quiet the furious mob, and when they actually fall silent, he doesn't speak to them in Greek.
No.
He addresses them in Aramaic.
Another massive language switch.
Yeah.
Why? Aramaic. Why not just keep using the Greek that just saved his life with the commander?
The study guide highlights this as a profound tactical and theological choice.
Okay.
Aramaic was the vernacular. It was the heart language of the Palestinian Jews.
Right.
It was the language of their homes, their childhoods, and their intimate religious life.
So it hit a totally different emotional chord.
Exactly. By speaking Aramaic instead of Greek, Paul was sending a powerful sociological signal to the mob.
He was telling them, I am one of you.
Yes, I know your language, I know your culture, I'm a son of this soil.
Wow.
It was the ultimate way to dismantle the false rumor that he was a Hellenized traitor who hated their customs.
Look at the specific shape of the tools Paul is weaponizing here.
It's amazing.
This is a huge practical takeaway for anyone listening to this deep dive. Paul is using his elite education.
Yeah.
He is using his civic status as a citizen of Tarsus.
Right.
He is using his polyglot linguistic skills, effortlessly switching between the language of the empire and the language of the street.
Yes, all of it.
And this is the crucial distinction, he isn't using any of these massive advantages to negotiate his release.
No, he's not trying to get out of jail.
He isn't using them to save his own skin or call in a lawyer.
Right.
He is using every ounce of his privilege and background exclusively to secure an audience for his message.
If we pull back and synthesize the core argument of this entire deep dive, this is the magnificent paradox the study guide wants us to grasp.
Yeah.
The title Ambassador in Chains perfectly encapsulates it.
It really does.
You can bind the messenger, you can beat him, you can strip him of his freedom, you can lock him in a military fortress.
Yeah.
But you cannot chain the message. As Paul himself would write later, from another Roman prison in his letter to Timothy.
What did he write?
He said, I suffer hardship to the point of imprisonment as a criminal, but God's message is not imprisoned.
Wow. When you look at the mechanics of what actually happened, God utilized the incredibly complex, often brutal legal and military systems of the day to accomplish exactly what he wanted.
That's exactly right.
He leveraged the false rumors of the Jewish zealots to create a crisis. He used the strict architectural laws of the temple to spark a riot, and he used the sheer, overwhelming military force of the Roman Empire, specifically Claudius Lysias and his 1,000 troops, to rescue Paul from an assassination.
And the end result of all that chaotic, terrifying machinery.
Yeah, what's the bottom line?
God effectively handed Paul a state-sponsored, highly elevated, heavily guarded platform.
It's unbelievable.
Paul is standing on the steps of the Roman fortress, physically protected by the swords and shields of the very empire that will eventually execute him.
Right.
And he's preaching his gospel to the exact audience of Jerusalemites he had traveled hundreds of miles to reach.
The chains were not the end of his ministry.
No.
They were the pulpit.
The chains were the platform.
It completely dismantles how we normally view adversity.
It really challenges you to rethink everything.
So as we wrap up, I want you, the listener, to really look at the specific shape of the obstacles in your own life right now.
Think about what's holding you back.
Right. Maybe it's a severely closed door, a massive misunderstanding in your community, a systemic roadblock, or just a situation where you feel totally bound and restricted by forces completely outside your control.
We all have those.
We do. But what if those very chains aren't holding you back at all?
The challenge is to stop looking at the obstacle as a derailment.
Yeah.
And start analyzing how the specific shape of that obstacle might dictate the exact strategy you need.
Precisely. Paul didn't just endure his chains, he weaponized the circumstances of his arrest to deliver his message.
He used what he was given.
So what if your current limitations are actually positioning you with mathematical precision exactly where you need to be to make the impact you were designed for?
That is a powerful thought to leave on.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the source material. Until next time, take a closer look at the chains and see if they just might be a platform in disguise.